Hey friends, it's Christy. I'm so thrilled to be back with you on the lawnfawn YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using I Heart Pandas, the I Heart Pandas add-on, and Mom Plus Me. I've stamped those images on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with lawnfawn jet black ink. And I'm going to refer back to a little color chart that I recently did a video on, and we are going to be coloring the purple pandas today because I want to create a night sky, and I want the night sky to reflect on the white parts of their fur. So the Copic markers that I will be using for them are BV quadruple 0, BV00, and BV01. I'm starting with that BV01 and laying in the darkest part of my shadow with that. And then I'm going to start blending out with the BV00. I am sticking very close to the drawn line on the edge because I want to leave most of the panda white so that they still look like a white and black panda. They just have a lot of depth and dimension to them with that shading. So I'm going to blend out the BV00 with the BV quadruple 0, and then I'm going to let that fade into the white cardstock. And as those Copics dry back, you're going to just get a nice kind of lilac toned shadow. I'm going to add some rosy cheeks to them using RV10, RV11, and RV13. I added the RV13 first, then I'm blending out around the edges of that with the RV11, and then finally the RV10, which is going to soften it into the rest of their fur. And then I brought in RV14 to do the two little hearts. So I'm starting with that, and then I'll blend out with the RV13 and use the RV11 for a highlight. I did decide that I wanted to go a little bit darker on those though, and I also wanted one to be shaded on the opposite side so that each of my pandas could hold one. So I brought in RV17 as well and just went over that in a second layer, blending out with the RV14 and then use the RV13 as the lightest. Next, I'm going to tackle the bamboo, and I'm going to use some more desaturated greens because this is a night scene, so there shouldn't be too many bright colors other than those hearts. So I'm going to use G40, G43, and G46 for the main part of the bamboo. And I'm kind of just outlining each section and then adding a little line down at the bottom of it to give that some depth, and I'm going to do that with the G46 for all of these. And I'm shading some of them on the left and some of them on the right, just depending on where they're going to end up on the card. I'm going to have a central light source on today's card. It's going to be just above the panda's head, even though there's not going to be a moon in the sky that you can see on the card. There will be stars, and so the stars are kind of what is creating the lights there. So I'm blending out the G46 with the G43, and then I'll add a little bit of that G40 in there as well so that they do have a nice highlight on one side. And I really like how that G40 adds a nice lightness without being too bright or too yellow toned, so it will still match with the whole nighttime feel of this card. I'm going to move on to the leaves, and I'm going to bring in G28 so they can be just a little bit darker. Since I'm effectively creating a forest of bamboo, I didn't want everything to be in the exact same tone, so I just decided to go a little bit darker with the leaves. And I'm going to place that G28 closest to the base of each leaf, and then start to blend that out with the G46 as I go toward the tip. And then I will blend out with the G43 for the lightest, so I will not use the G40 on the leaves. But I'm just making sure to go over the edge of that G46 and just soften it into the lightest area so that I get a smoother blend. I love that there are so many different sizes of the bamboo so that we can really create some nice full scenes. I'm going to move on to the moth, and I wanted to do just a white moth because it's going to be up in the sky and I wanted it to be really reflective and light. And so I'm just using E40 and E41 and leaving a little bit of white cardstock on the edges of the wings. And then I wanted to show you that I did use the Crunchy Leaf ink to stamp the stump since it is a solid image and it is alcohol marker friendly. So I'm going to continue using that E40 and E41 for the top of the stump and the little heart, and I stamped that me plus you in that heart. You can leave it blank, or there are a couple of other options that you can stamp there from the Mom plus Me stamp set. I wanted to darken up the lower part of the stump, so I added in E42 and E43, and I'm just picking and choosing some areas that I think might be a little bit more recessed and coloring them in a little bit darker to create some nice dimension on there. So I'm using E43 for the darkest, blending out with the E42. And then I also did use a little bit of E41 on that, but I did not use the E40 on the lower part of the stump. And I did go a little bit light on my first attempt just to see if I liked how it was looking, but I decided to darken that up a little bit with a second layer. So I'm just going back in a few of those darkest places and adding a little bit more so that the image will look more saturated and dimensional. And once I am done with that, I am going to trim all of these images out with their matching dies. For my focal panel, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock, and I am popping that in my MISTI so that I can stamp some images from the Upon a Star stamp set. I'm going to treat that liberally with my Rabbit Hole Designs powder tool to remove any static cling, as I'm going to be white heat embossing on this so I can do some emboss resist. And I'm going to stamp those images in Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink that works great for embossing because it grips a hold of the powder and holds it in place until you can heat set it. And I am pressing very lightly over all of those images so that I don't squish them and have them kind of get misshapen. And I will repeat that process once again, just inking that up, pressing down very lightly to ensure that everything did get stamped well. Then I'm going to coat this with some lawnfawn embossing powder. This is the white embossing powder. I just keep it in this large tub because it's the one that I use most often. And I can tap off any excess and put it back in the container, and there you can see a little bit better what the images were that I stamped. I'll bring my heat gun to that after about 60 seconds of heating that off to the side, and I like to heat from both the back and the front just so that I don't end up scorching my embossing powder. I want that to stay bright white. And it also helps minimize some of the warping going back and forth like that. So that's what I did. And while I have my MISTI out, I'm going to finish up all of my stamping. So next I'm working on my sentiment, and I'm using the Henry's Build a Sentiment Love and creating my own phrase. I love that there's so many words that we can mix and match, and it's very easy to line up because they're all cut very straight. I'm going to ink those up with some plastic flamingo ink. And the phrase that I put together says, "You're the only one for me." So I'm going to stamp that down and ink that up a second time just to make sure it's nice and bold and legible. And then I'll set that aside and pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using Lawnfawn Ballet Slippers cardstock. And I am stamping again in that plastic flamingo ink, and I put together another sentiment and then pulled some images from I Heart Pandas and the I Heart Pandas add-on. And the sentiment that I put together says, "I'm so lucky to have you," which I just thought was really sweet and very personal. So I'm going to stamp that down again, and then I'll set this aside and move back to my focal panel. So now I'm going to work on my embossed resist technique, and so I'm going to blend some Distress Oxide inks right over the embossing that I have already done on this panel. And I'm starting with my lightest shade, which is shaded lilac, and I'm placing that in the center, just adding a little bit of color there, kind of blocking out for myself where I eventually want the lightest area to be. Then I'll come in with my next shade, which is going to be Dusty Concord, and I'll start bringing that in from the top and the two sides. The bottom is going to be covered up, so I don't need to worry about that part. And you can see so much better the embossing now once the dark colors get over top of it. So I'm going to darken that up even further using my final shade, which is going to be Villainous Potion. And I'll start bringing that in on top of the Dusty Concord. And when I do my first layer of Distress Oxide inks, I'm never worried about blending them together or how they look right now, because Distress Oxides need to be layered in order to really blend nicely. So all I'm doing with this initial layer is kind of blocking in where I want each of those colors to be. And then I'll start working my way back in the reverse and concentrating a little bit more on the blend. But I'm going to work my way from the lightest to darkest, and then from the darkest to lightest, and then back out again. I usually go over everything at least twice, and often even more than that, because the more you blend over them, the better they're going to look together. So I've worked my way back out to the Villainous Potion once again. And then I'm going to work my way to the center for the last time using that Dusty Concord, and then finally that shaded lilac. And now you can see all of those stars really standing out. So I'm going to do some splatter detail just to add a little extra interest, but I'm only going to use the darkest shade, which is the Villainous Potion. I pressed that onto an acrylic block, added a little bit of water to that to make it more fluid, and then picked that up with a thin paintbrush and tap that all over the background. I'm also going to do that with some gansai tambi starry colors. I added some water to this pearlized shade, and I'll tap that all over the background. This is going to add a nice shimmer and also like some more distant looking stars. And then for some more bright white stars, I'm going to take some Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, which is just an acrylic paint. I'll mix that up with some water as well, and then splatter this all over the background. And this is going to be super bright white, so it's going to pull some of those stars forward into the scene. Then I'm going to set this panel aside to dry completely, and I am going to work on the grass area. And I have trimmed that down with the lawnfawn simple stitched hillside borders. I use the middle one. There's 3 different sizes. And I'm going to bring in some green Distress Oxide inks. And I went for greens that were a bit dark and more desaturated to match with the Copic Coloring and fit with the nighttime scene. So the first shade I'm using is Mowed Lawn. Again, I'm not worried about the blend at this point. Then I'm going to bring in some Rustic Wilderness and start laying in that along that top edge so it will really highlight the stitching detail. And then I'm going to bring in my final shade, which is going to be Pine Needles. And so I'll add just a little bit of that one, not too much. I just wanted a little bit of that kind of darker bluish toned green to kind of tie in with the purples. Then I'll start blending back down in the reverse and really trying to smooth everything out a bit. Once I'm satisfied with how that is looking, I will also do some splatter detail so it matches the background. I'm not going to do any of the white or the pearlized shimmer because I want the stars to just be up in the sky, but I will take the Rustic Wilderness and mix that up with some water and just add a little bit of interest to the grassy panel. And then I'll set this aside to dry as well. So once the first panel has dried, I am going to take a tissue and just go over the embossing and remove any ink that is sitting on top, which is going to make the embossing look bright white again. Now I'm ready to start assembling, so I am going to take that background panel and glue that to my card front using the glue tube for that and just lining that up so that it's straight on there. It is a standard A2 size card, so it's 4¼ wide by 5½ tall. And then I'll take the grass piece and add that down at the bottom. I did not take the glue all the way up to the top of the panel so that I'm still able to slip some things back behind the edge of the grass. Then I'll bring in my images and start to lay things out. I want that stump to be right underneath that heart-shaped star, and the two pandas will be sitting on top of that. So once I have the placement right for the stump, I'll go ahead and glue that down. I'm going to keep everything flat on this card, so it's going to be great for mailing. I'll take those two little hearts and I'm going to put one into the arms of each of those pandas. There is a separate die in the I Heart Pandas stamp set where you can trim out their little arms. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but I thought it would be cute for them to each be holding these little hearts, and it just added a nice bright pop of something extra on the card. And it also just reinforces that love or Valentine theme. This card could certainly be a Valentine card. It could also just be an anniversary card or just because I love you card, since it doesn't actually say Valentine's Day on it. But sometimes I like having some extra just love cards in my stash for, just any time. Or an anniversary that's coming up or anything like that. So I'm arranging my bamboos, and I didn't like how the two short ones looked too similar down in front, so I'm going to swap one of those with the medium-sized one, and I will slip that back behind the grassy border so that it looks like it's a little bit taller. I'm also arranging them so that the bamboo that is immediately to the left and right of the pandas has the highlight on the inside edge, as if that heart constellation is casting its glow on them. But the bamboo that is next to those has the reflection on the outside edge, because when they're right up next to each other, they probably wouldn't be getting as much light. That was my thought anyway. So I am just adding those so that there is like a little forest around them, and they are right in the center of that in a little clearing underneath the night sky. And then I also have some little bamboo shoots that I'm going to arrange down in front just to take up some more space there and kind of enclose them in a little bit more. So I stamped two of the bamboo shoot that has two leaves on it, just so I could have an odd number of bamboo. Sometimes I feel like odd numbers just are a little bit more visually appealing. So I'm going to add that one over on the right hand side. And then I'm going to take that little moth trail and the moth, and I'll add that over to the top right. I kind of left a space there with my embossing for it. So I'm just going to fill that in with the trail and the moth and make sure that they are lined up how I want them. And then I can bring in my sentiment. I trimmed that down with the smallest of the everyday sentiment banners, and I just selectively trimmed that to the length of the sentiment. And I'm going to glue that right down at the bottom, just lining that up straight and then pressing that into place. And then all that's left is to add a little bit of glitter. So I'm going to take some Stardust Stickles and I'm going to fill in the centers of any of the embossed stars that have the center open. So there's a couple solid ones there, but most of them have the center open. So I'm just going to add a little bit of sparkle to those. I'll also add it to my butterfly wings and to the hearts that the two pandas are holding. And then I also decided to add a few extra stars to the sky. So I'm just going to lightly dot the nib of the stickles onto the background in a few little places here and there, and get a few extra of those little glitter stars on the background. And that is going to finish up this card, so I will lift that up so you can see that in a little more detail, hopefully catch some of the sparkle and shine, and give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, go ahead and give the video a like or leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from you. And thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.